Profesor, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Profesor, pasamos pues a compartir, bueno, primero que nada pues damos inicio a nuestra sesión número uno de Composición 2 con el profesor Santos Monrroy. Profesor, pasamos ahora sí a compartir los parámetros de la sesión.
Vale, está bien.
Estudiantes, estos son los parámetros de las sesiones por videoconferencia. Las sesiones se graban, para que podemos verlas nuevamente en la plataforma virtual. Les solicitamos que por favor silencien su micrófono y puedan activarlos cuando quieran hacer consultas o aportes con el permiso del docente. Le pedimos que mantengan su cámara activa. De no poder hacerlo, enviar sus excusas por el chat de Zoom, o de lo contrario serán retirados de la sesión y les serán restados puntos de la heterovaloración del docente. Mi rol como moderador es facilitar y apoyar en la parte técnica. Las consultas las hacemos por el chat personal o general. Les exhorto a tener bolígrafo y papel para hacer sus anotaciones y aprovechar al máximo estas sesiones. Listo, profesor.
Vale. Okay. Welcome to composition number 2. This is our first session. My name is Santos Enrique. I am going to be your professor for this course. In this first session, we are gonna see some glossary about important terms that it's really important to know what they mean. But as you see in composition 1, composition is very important because we can learn. Sometimes we can say that it's easy when we speak, when we transmit information, but when we have to put that information in a written format, it's take a little bit more time because we need to read carefully what we write. We need to see the spelling. If we have some mistakes in spelling, probably we need to check the grammar and things like that. And also to join ideas, we need to get some connectors. So composition is like a process. It's a process in which you have to concentrate a little bit to get good results. But in this first session, we are gonna see just some glossaries that is really important to know. The first one, we're gonna learn about poetry. So what poetry is about, let's see. Poetry has been around for almost 4,000 years. Like other forms of literature, poetry is written to share ideas, express emotions, and create imagery. Poets choose words from their meanings and acoustics, arranging them to create a tempo known as the meter. Some poems incorporate rhymes, schemes with two or more lines that end in like-sounding words. When we can find poetry, we can find poetry when we see literature. Some of you, I'm sure, that have seen probably American literature or have been dealing with children literature, because literature is too broad that sometimes must be divided into sections because there are too many things to see in literature, but poetry is part of that. It's very famous because we can find poetry almost everywhere, not also in English, but in many other languages we find poetry. So it's something that we need to know the use of and the kind of or stuff of poetry. There is someone that is very important in English, which is Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote many interesting poems. So if we want to get more information about poetry, or in other words, we can find examples. One of the author I suggest is Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote very interesting poems. And also we learn about Edgar Allan Poe when we see American literature. There are many examples about his work. So what is poetry, or what is poetry used for? Poetry is a type of literature that as I already mentioned, it's part of the literature, because literature, it also includes not only poetry, but also include novels, include fantasy, include tales, and also poetry. Poetry is used to convey a thought, describe a scene, or tell a story in a concentrated lyrical arrangement of words. That's the use of poetry. Also, poems can be structured with rhyming lines and meter, the rhythm and emphasis of a line based on symbolic beats. Poems can also be free from, which follows no formal structure. But I'm going to explain a little bit the poetry structure. Okay, basically, the poetry is, if we talk about poetry, we need to see the structure of a poetry. And this is what we're going to see in this class. So poetry is basically that, the structure. But what we have in this structure, first, we have the stanza, the first one. We're going to see the stanza. We are going to see the rhyme. We can also see the meter. Remember that I already talked about what's the meter, and the line break. This is the structure of poetry. So when poems can be used, okay, poems can be used, can be structured with rhyming lines and method, the rhythm and emphasis of line based on syllabic beats, but also they can omit all of that and be just free from. What free for means that they don't have to follow any formal structure. So this is the formal structure, the stanza, the rhyme, the meter, the line break. But sometimes if poetry or poems don't follow this structure, they are called free form poems. And what are free form poems? Means that they do not follow any, let's see. And this is what we have for free form poems. They do not follow any structure. And what is the structure? The stanza, the rhyme, the meter, and the line break. So later we are gonna see what this structure means. What is a stanza? Sometimes we can have a stanza 1 and a stanza 2, the second stanza. But let's see what it means. Okay, the basic building block of a poem is a verse known as a stanza. So this is the first one. Let's see what stanza means. A stanza is a grouping of lines related to the same thought or topic, similar to the paragraph in prose. A stanza can be subdivided based on the number of lines it contains. For example, a couplet is a stanza with 2 lines. Once again, the basic building block. Remember that a poem consists of lines. Those lines are called stanza. Stanza is what we have to a group of lines, but depending on the amount of lines, the stanza can be also can have different types. One example is the couplet. The couplet is a stanza which just contain 2 lines. Another important things to remember about a stanza is that the stanza is all about the same topic, the same thought, the same idea. So all the lines are describing the same topic. That's why a stanza is about. A group of lines that are they are similar like a paragraph, and all of the lines in this stanza describe a topic, describe an idea. That is what we call a stanza in poetry. Let's see this one. On the page, poetry is visibly unique, a narrow column of words with recurring breaks between stanzas. Remember, stanzas are similar to paragraphs. Lines of a poem may be indented or lengthened with extra space in between words. The white space that frames a poem is an aesthetic guide for how a poem is read. Okay, now let's see what is a meter in poetry. It means that a poem can contain many elements to give it structure. Rhyme is perhaps the most common of these elements. Countless poetic works, from limericks to epic poem to pop lyrics, contain rhymes, but equally important is meter, which imposes a specific length and emphasis on a given line of poetry. Learn more about meter. We can also get a little bit more information. On the platform, we have examples of meter. Remember that we're gonna be summarizing some of the information that you have on the platform in this classroom and also giving you a example of the topics given there. But it's important that if you want to clarify a little bit more, you can go to the platform, and also you have some activities to do there, which are very important to do them on time. Okay, I will give you an example about method. For example, if I have to analyze method, I'm going to see in this one pronunciation. For example, I have a line. So in a line, I have to be the stress, probably the stress and unstressed syllables in a line. So if I have, for example, a poem can contain many elements to give it structure. So I'm gonna see how many syllables, stress syllables I have in this line. So if I have contain, my stress syllabus is contain. So this is what the method is about. So in this line, I can say, I'm going to see all the stress syllables from those words, and then I will have the method. So I can say, okay, in the first line, I have 5 stress syllables, or I have 6 unstressed syllables. That was the method is about. The method is about that. I'm gonna see the stress and unstressed syllables, and I'm gonna be counted them for from lines. Another important aspect is that most of the time, the stress syllables in English comes after an unstressed. For example, if I say perhaps, perhaps, per, it's going to be my unstressed syllables, and haps, it's going to be my stress syllables. Now, once again, let's explain what is an stanza. I already mentioned that the stanzas are lines similar to paragraph, but let's read this one and then analyze better with also with examples the meaning of stanza. Let's see. In poetry, a stanza is used to describe the main building block of a poem. Remember, paragraph. It is a unit of poetry composed of lines related to similar thought or topic, like a paragraph in prose or verse in a song. So, a stanza is a paragraph. It's similar to a paragraph that describes the same idea. Every stanza in a poem has its own concept and serves as a unique purpose. The same happen. Example, when we are writing a essay. You know what's the parts of essay? We have the introduction, we have the body paragraph, and we have the conclusion. So if the essay is about the advantages and disadvantages of living in a city, our first body paragraph, it's going to describe the advantages. The second body paragraph, it's going to talk about the disadvantages. The conclusion is going to summarize some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages, and also the conclusion provide the author personal opinion. And the introduction introduce the essay in a very general way and finish with a thesis statement. The thesis statement connect or present the body paragraph. The same happened with the stanza. So each of the stanza in a poem describe a specific topic. That's the purpose of stanzas. What's the difference? The difference is, if we talk about paragraphs, the minimum sentences, complete ideas for a paragraph is 5 lines. When you are writing a paragraph in English, the minimum of sentences you have to have at least 5 sentences to make a paragraph in English. In poetry, when you have a stanza, we can have a stanza with just 2 lines. That's the difference between a paragraph and a stanza. What they have in common between a stanza and paragraph, what they have similar is that both are related to the same idea, to the same topic. The difference is that we can have a stanza with 2 lines, but we cannot have a paragraph with 2 lines. We can have a paragraph from 5 lines to more lines. That's the difference. That's what they have in similar, and the difference has its own concept and serve a unique purpose. What is that? Okay, a stanza is related to the same topic, describe the same idea. A stanza may be arranged according to the rhyming patterns and meters, the syllabic beats of a line. Once again, the rhythm, the rhyming patterns and meters. I describe that meters is stress and unstress. Stress and unstress. Some of the time, most of the time, we have stress syllables after unstressed syllables. I will give you an example. So if I say computer, computer, I have com unstressed, puter, stress syllables. So the stanza, the meters count the amount of stress syllables in a line. So if I would like to go to the mall, I need to count how many stress syllables I have in this line. Depending on the amount of syllables, we can have, I can say, I have one stress syllable method, 2 stress syllable method, 3 stress syllable method, and so on. Finally, a stanza may be arranged according to rhyming pattern and meters, the syllable beats of a line. It can also be a free flowing verse that has no formal structure. Remember that I say for that, it can be a free form poem. A free form poem is when it doesn't follow a formal structure. What's the formal structure? It has to have a stanza, it has to have meters and rhyme, and also the breaking line. So let's continue. In this one, let's read what is a rhyme scheme, and then I'm going to discuss. Okay, in rhyme scheme, we have different soft, different, in other words, different type of rhymes than poets use in their work. We have internal rhyme, slang rhymes, eyes rhymes, identical rhymes, and more. So there are many. One of the most common ways to write a rhyming poem is to use a rhyme scheme composed of short vowel sounds or consonants. So let's see what we have. 15 types of poetic forms. The first one, we have blank verse. What is the blank verse? It's a poetry written with a precise meter, almost always iambic pentameter that does not rhyme. So this is the first one, the blank verse. Let's analyze the second one, the rhyme poetry. Okay, the second one, we have the rhymed poetry. The rhyme poetry, it contrasts to blank verse. Rhyme poems rhyme by definition, although their skin vary. The third one, the free verse. The free verse poetry is poetry that lacks a consistent rhyme scheme, metrical pattern, or musical form. We have the epics. An epic poem is a lengthy narrative work of poetry. These long poems typically detail extraordinary feats and adventures of characters from a distant past. Okay, let's read this one first, and then we're going to discuss what is narrative poetry, haiku, pastoral poetry, and sonnet. Okay, let's see this one. What is a narrative poetry? A narrative poetry is similar to an epic and narrative poems. Tell a story, a Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's The Midnight Ride of Paul. Let me see here. Okay. The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the rhyme of the ancient mariner, exemplify this form. So these are examples of narrative poetry. What is haiku? A haiku is a three-line poetic form originating in Japan. The first line has 5 syllables. The second line has 7 syllables. And the third line again has 5 syllables. Remember, when we count syllables, we are talking about meters. The pastoral poetry, a pastoral poetry poem is one that concerns the natural world, rural life and landscapes. These poems have preserved from ancient Greece in the poetry of Hesiod to ancient Rome Virgil to the present day Cari Cinder. We have sonnet. What is a sonnet? It's a 14-line poem, typically but not exclusively, concerning the topic of love. Sonnets contain internal rhymes within their 14 lines. The exact rhyme scheme depends on the style of a sonnet. Okay, now let's see this one. We're gonna read this first, and then we're gonna analyze and discuss. Okay, let's see this one. Elegies. What is elegy? An elegy is a poem that reflects upon death or loss. Traditionally, it contains themes of mourning, loss, and reflection. However, it can also explore themes of redemption and consolidation. Ode. Much like an elegy, an ode is a tribute to its subjects, although the subject need not to be dead or even sentient, as in John Keats' ode and Gratian Urn. Limerick. A limerick is a five-line poem that consists of a single stanza in AABBA rhyme schemes and whose subject is a short, pithy tale or description. Lyric poetry. Lyric poetry refers to the broad category of poetry that concerns feeling and emotion. This distinguishes it from two other poetic categories, epic and dramatic. Then we can also have this one, the ballad, Soliloquy, and Villanelle. So we're gonna read this one once again, and after that, we're gonna discuss the meanings and use of these final three. Okay, let's see. Ballad. A ballad or ballad is a form of narrative verse. So remember that I believe that here we talk about, let's see, let me go back. We see narrative poetry. So narrative poetry, inside narrative poetry, we can also have ballad because it's a form of narrative verse that can be either poetic or musical. It typically follows a pattern of rhyme quatrains from John Keats to Samuel Taylor, Coleridge to Bob Dylan, and also represent a melodious form of uh, storytelling. Then we have soliloquy. A soliloquy is a monologue in which a character speaks to him or herself, expressing inner thoughts that an audience might not otherwise know. Soliloquies are not definitionally poems, although they often can be most famously in the plays of William Shakespeare. And finally, Villanelle and 18-line poems consisting of 5 tercets and a quatrain with a highly specified internal rhyme scheme. Originally a variation on a pastoral, the villanelle has evolved to describe obsessions and other intense subjects matter, as exemplified by Dylan Thomas, author of villanelles such as "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night." So those are the 15 example of type of poetry. If you notice here, all of them specify the amount of lines, the amount of stanza, and the meters. Remember the meters, how they sounds. The methods, when we talk about method, immediately we're talking about stress and non-stress syllables. The rhymes means about the sounds, and the stanza is about the amount of lines in each of these poems. So now we can continue with this one. What is imagery in poetry? So let's read this and then we're gonna discuss it. Okay, let's see. In this one, what is Imagery in poetry. In poetry and literature, imagery it's the use of figurative language to evoke a sensory experience in the reader. So when a poet uses descriptive language well, they play to readers' senses, providing them with sight, taste, smell, sounds, internal and external feeling, and even internal emotion. So imagery means when you transmit feelings in literature. So it means the figurative language to evoke those senses, to evoke those experience to the reader. So I have this question. What is the difference between blank verse and free verse poetry? We already discussed and explained some of the similarities and differences between them. So we're gonna take some time to read this one. Then we're gonna discuss to find and list the similarities and differences between blank verse and free verse poetry. Okay, one of the differences between them is when we talk about the metrical pattern. In the blank verse that started first, they don't follow a metrical pattern as free verse does. So that is basically one of the strongest differences between blank verse and free verse. The first one, the blank verse, was very used for William Shakespeare, John Milton, William Wordsworth, and countless, means to many others. So that is the difference between one and the other. So next question. What is mimesis in poetry? It says here that copying is something that the writers usually strive to avoid, copying from others. Remember that in poetry, the author have the references from others authors. So when they have that, people or the readers can compare and they can say probably that this work is too similar to others, or it follow the same meaning, the same idea. So for authors, it's very important to avoid copying. But how can they do that? Probably the literary theory of mimesis says that the artists copy constantly as a matter of necessity. Yes, because as we already talked about the 15 different type of poetry, all of them follow a standard. So it means that depending on what type of style the author is, they have all of them have to follow the same standards. But they have the necessity to do that. The difference is that this make their art bad, probably no. And why? Because centuries of thinkers from Plato and Aristotle onwards have attempted to answer this question by debating the nature of mimesis. In conclusion, authors, depending on the style they are writing, they are using in poetry, all of them have to follow standards. The difference is that each one of them has a sense, has a sentiment that they can transmit throughout their works. This question: what is onomatopoeia in poetry? So let's take some time. We're gonna read and then we're gonna discuss the meaning of, the use of, and how can we apply it in poetry. Onomatopoeia. Let's see. Onomatopoeia in poetry. Usually how words sounds bears no relationship to what they mean. That's not true in the case onomatopoeia, where words sounds like what they are. I will give you an example. If I'm talking about fireworks, fireworks sounds like boom. So I can say, I'm gonna write here some example. Let me see. I can say the boom of the fireworks. Boon, the word boon is an onomatopoeia because I read the word boon exactly how fireworks sounds. So fireworks sounds like boon. And this is an onomatopoeia. I get here some more examples that I want to share. The bee buzzes on my ear. So if I have to read the word buzzes, it's exactly the same that bee makes. So bee makes like zzz. So this sounds is exactly when I read the word buzzes, buzzes or buzz. So this is onomatopoeia. I have more example. For example, I can say the cat meows at night. So the word meows, it's is read exactly how cats do. So I can also say the children are splashing around, splashing around. So the word splashing is almost the same as when you splash water. So this is another example of onomatopoeia. So the English language is littered with these mimicking words from meowing cats to babbling brooks. In poetry and literature, the onomatopoeic effect is something writers can harness to create vivid imaginary without verbosity. In other words, writers use those words to make a more realistic their lines, their poetry. This one. What is an enjambment in poetry? Okay, what is enjambment in poetry? Poetry is a structured literary form with patterns and rhythms that dedicate the flow of verses. Line notation in poetry is how lines are divided and where they end in relation to a clause or thought. Having a line break at the end of a phrase or complete thought is a regular and expected pattern in poetry. Poets subvert this expectation by using a technique called enjambment. At the very beginning of the class, I talk about another way to describe enjambment is when I have line break. This is the line break. To know when break the line. So we can break the line at the end of a phrase, at the end of a complete thought. This is basically the two regular and expected pattern in poetry. Remember, we can have a line break at the end of a phrase or a complete thought. Next, what is dissonance in poetry? Okay, the human brain instinctively looks for harmony. When it is denied harmony, it can create a powerful moment, whether that's for the purposes of creating tension, capturing inner turmoil, or bringing a bit of levity. Dissonance injects discomfort into text through inharmonious sounds and on even rhythms. What is consonance in poetry? In poetry, rhyme isn't the only way to introduce memorability and musicality. Consonance presents poets with the possibility of playing around with the repetition of consonant sounds. Then, what is assonance in poetry? From William Wordsworth to Kendrick Lamar, generation of poets have used assonance as a looser alternative to strict rhymes. Assonance, the repetition of vowel sounds, is distinctive from consonance, which refers to the repetition of consonant sounds, along with rhymes and alliteration. It is a powerful poetic device that writers can use to make their word stand out. Then we have, what is alliteration in poetry? We're gonna read this one and then we're gonna discuss it. Okay, in this one, what is alliteration in poetry? Sometimes called initial rhyme or heard rhyme, alliteration is one poetic device that's unmissable in our everyday world. Poets, advertisers, and headline writers all regularly take this approach of repeating initial letter sounds to grab people's attention. In poetry, it also injects focus, harmony, and rhythm. So to finish, I have this question. What type of activities you can do with your students using poems? Let's see what we can do to practice poem with our students. Okay, finally, to answer this question, the activities that we can do with our students, we can find that there are many engaging activities that we can do with a student using poems. I'm gonna mention one of them. The first one is poetry analysis. Have your student analyze themes, imagery, and poetic devices using poems? Recitation, encourage students to memorize and recite poems, allow focusing on expression and fluency. Creative writing, use poem as inspiration for the students to write their own poetry, exploring similar themes or experimenting with different styles. Poetry slam. Organize a poetry slam where students can perform their own poem or recite their favorite poems in front of their peers, in front of the class. Visual interpretation. Have students create visual interpretation of poems through art or multimedia projects. Collaborative poems. Encourage students to work together to create collaborative poems, either by each contributing a line or a stanza or by taking turns writing and revising. Comparative analysis. Compare and contrast different poems on similar topics or by the same poet, exploring how different poets approach the same themes. And finally, performance poetry. Explore performance poetry or spoken word poetry, discussing how performance enhances the meaning and impact of a poem. So these activities can help students develop their critical thinking skills, creativity, and appreciation for poetry. So the list, if you notice, we have too many things that we can do with our students. So it's very important. Once again, I said that go to the platform, check the module number 1, check your activities, participate on the forum, and if you have any question, you can write to me throughout the forum. Have an excellent week, and I see you next week. Listo por hoy.
Listo, profesor. Si no tenemos más consultas o aportes, podemos dar como finalizada la sesión de la noche de hoy.